The No Mask Murder by Akimitsu Takagi is one of the weirdest, wildest, and most daringly unique mystery novels I have ever read. If you're a big fan of crime fiction and murder mysteries, then you'll probably know that Honkaku Japanese murder mysteries are excellent. There are a lot of really great names within the Honkaku mystery genre that continue to have impressive legacies even to this day, and Takagi is one of them. He is no longer with us, and the stories we currently have in translation were written and take place just after World War II. This book was absolutely brilliantly translated by Jesse Kirkwood, and it was published in the UK by Pushkin Press, who sent me this review copy. And the exact same thing happened like 2 years ago with The Tattoo Murder, which was Takagi's debut novel. It was the first book of his that I read. It was also translated by Jesse Kirkwood and also published by Pushkin Press. But The Tattoo Murder was normal, for lack of a better word, when it comes to Honkaku Japanese murder mysteries. It was a locked room mystery story. It was unique in its own way. One interesting thing about it was that you really got to know the victim before she died. You spend like the first quarter or even third of the novel with her before her death. In that way, it felt more like a thriller or a drama than a crime novel, but it is still a locked room mystery story. But there's not really a sleuth. There's a group of characters, one of whom probably did it, and they're all trying to figure it out and point fingers and blah blah blah. It is different, but not radically so. This, however, very much is. The No Mask Murder is the strangest, most unique mystery novel I have ever read. And here's why. For starters, as the blurb gives away, Takagi himself is in this story. He inserted himself as a character, not a surrogate, not a stand-in. Literally he himself, with his own name. And we begin with a prologue where Takagi explains that he had always wanted to write a mystery story. He grew up on mystery stories from around the world. He was a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, etc., etc. And he always had the idea that in order to write an original mystery story, it would have to basically be true crime. He dreamt of being brought into a crime scene in order to solve it, to be asked to play the role of the sleuth, to solve the mystery himself using his knowledge, using the expertise he has gleaned from reading so many of these stories. And then he would novelize it. He'd turn it into a kind of manuscript, and then he'd sell it, and that would just be great. And then he says, well, this actually happened, but not in the way he expected. After the war ended, Takagi reconnected with a childhood friend called Koichi. Koichi was living with a family, the patriarch of which he was very close to when he was younger. That patriarch was a scientist, and he has since died. But the Chizui family still take Koichi in. But something is wrong in the Chizui household. They are being haunted by a Hanya mask from No Theatre. This little guy. The Chizui house is massive, and there are lots of people living there. Brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. Big family, big house. And the family has inherited an heirloom, a Hanya mask of a demon. And this mask is said to be cursed because the No actor who wore it cursed it himself before he died. And it does seem like this mask is causing some trouble. And so when trouble starts, Koichi asks Takagi, hey, you're an expert in crime stuff. You spend your entire life reading these novels instead of getting a fucking job. Why don't you come in and be our sleuth? Figure out what's going on here. Very early in the novel, the new patriarch of the family is found dead in a locked room. He seems to have died from a heart attack, and the No mask is sitting on the floor. There is a perfume-like smell in the room, and they all start wondering what happened. Did he have a heart attack? Probably not. Seems like murder to me. Takagi is very excited. He dons his deerstalker hat and tries to solve the murder. But he does a shit job. That's what makes this so unique. At first, according to the blurb and the prologue, it seems like Takagi has placed himself in the role of protagonist and genius sleuth. But no, it's way more fun and strange than that. Instead of placing himself in that role, writing a story around himself where he bursts in as the sleuth and solves the crime, he does a terrible job of it. He keeps finding dead ends. He keeps thinking about these crime stories he's read. Well, you know, what if this is a Roger Ackroyd situation or a Crooked House? What if this is like that one story that one person wrote? No, maybe not. That doesn't work. I'm a genius. I'll figure it out. And he can't figure it out. And you know that all of this is going to happen in the prologue because he says that. He says in the prologue, I was given the opportunity to be a sleuth and I did a bad job of it. Instead, my friend solved this case and I'm going to tell you that story. But he doesn't even tell you the story because the story has been handed to him. When the prologue ends, you turn the page and you're in a letter. The letter was written by the chief inspector of the official crime of the Chisui family. And the chief inspector says, Koichi solved the crime. He was amazing. Unfortunately, every single member of the family died, but he still solved the crime. And I have attached his journal here for you to do with as you will. And so then we're reading Koichi's journal. That's the main bulk of this novel. Koichi writes the journal, and during the journal he says many unfavourable things about Takagi, who did a shit job as sleuth. And in the prologue, Takagi admits that he was saddened by that. But if you think about the fact that he dreamt of being a sleuth and solving a crime and then publishing that as his own novel, he still gets to do that because it's framed as though that's what this is, but it's not his. He was handed his best friend's journal, the friend who actually did the sleuthing because he was clever, and now Takagi has novelized it and published it, and that's what we have. That's the way that it's presented to us, and I think it is so camp, so silly, so goofy. It made me laugh several times just thinking about how all of this is being framed. I didn't get over it for the whole novel, and this makes me realize that I didn't care that much about the crime, about the setup, about the family. But you have to, because it is a locked room mystery, and not just one, but a series of murders, and each of these deaths is a heart attack. First of all, it seems plausible, but the second death is a young man, the third death is a young woman, and they're all being killed by heart attacks. What's going on here? And another great thing about this book is its aesthetic. It is very theatrical. The killer is wearing a Hanya mask. The mask is cursed. And several times characters remark on the fact that they feel like they're living through a drama. There are references to Shakespeare. There are lots of references to theatre outside of Japan. No theatre plays a huge part, obviously, because of the mask, but there are plenty of theatrical references. And the story feels very theatrical. It is camp. Some of the characters almost feel kind of cabaret in their performances, in the way that they present themselves and the way that their dialogue reads. But it's also very gothic. It is a dark story of dark, screwed up people. There is a madhouse in this story. There is a character who isn't in a madhouse but has clearly gone insane. The house itself is like a labyrinth. There are a lot of gothic tropes and themes at play here. A story that is once very theatrical and very gothic is not something you see every day, and it goes together so nicely. But I do think that a trigger warning is appropriate here because there are references to very discomforting assault. I mean, all assault isn't pleasant, but the assault that is depicted here and referenced here is particularly grueling and skin-crawling, so just bear that in mind. It is not pleasant. And actually, the way that the assault is framed and a few other things do date this story. It was a story that was written around 1950. It is old, and Kirkwood has done such a great job of bringing it to us, bringing it to our language and bringing it to the modern day, but there are still elements and moments in the plot that feel kind of awkward and dated, and like with Agatha Christie stories, it's something you have to grit your teeth and bear. But these are fleeting moments. Most of the story is camp, theatrical, and very gothic, with this absurd, hilarious, very, very brilliantly entertaining framing device. There was so much to love and respect here in this story. The fact that Takagi frames himself as a shit sleuth is at first hilarious, but you wonder how that's going to continue to play into the story, especially at the end. And I do wish I could talk about the ending because it is a multi-layered ending with several twists in it. It's really fun and satisfying. As a locked room mystery, it will not blow your mind. There are a lot of great locked room mysteries, and Takagi himself has written more than one, but the way that the end kind of piles on the twists and reveals is a lot of fun, and again feels very camp. Kind of silly, but definitely original. In fact, right at the beginning of the story, as I think I've mentioned, there is a reference to Roger Ackroyd, one of the more famous Agatha Christie stories, where the killer. That had never been done before. The book remarks on that. And so you know that can't be how it's going to go. It's not going to be a Roger Ackroyd situation. Takagi is coming out of his character in the story. He is talking directly to you, the reader, and promising that the No Mask murder will be something unique. He promises that. And yeah, it is. It certainly was for its time. And the framing device makes it intensely unique. Absolutely brilliant. One of a kind. A really strange and daring way to frame a story that is wonderfully theatrical, brilliantly camp, and delightfully gothic. It does a lot, it juggles a lot in about 250 pages, and it succeeds. It is one of the most entertaining mystery stories I've ever read. Please check it out. Now it's time for my Patreon book recommendation of the week. This recommendation comes from Romance Girl, and I've been waiting for this recommendation because, as a horror fan, it is weird that I haven't read this particular book. Romance Girl says, I am trying hopelessly to read House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. It's huge. It is almost dangerous, but I would be so excited for you to read it. But it has a downside. It is long and not linear in any way. I'm really grateful for this recommendation, and I'm glad that it's finally come because as someone who talks a lot about horror on this channel, it is funny that I haven't mentioned House of Leaves, that it feels like an elephant in the room. I haven't ever read House of Leaves. And there's a reason for that. House of Leaves has always felt like bro-lit. Much like the novels of Haruki Murakami, whom I will probably never read again, House of Leaves kind of has a reputation. It has a fan base of bros who think it's really clever and think they're really clever for getting it, for reading it, for understanding it, for getting through it. If you know anything about House of Leaves, you know that it has that reputation. It has that vibe, that following around it. And it is not the book's fault, it is not the author's fault, but the aura around it, the position that it has in the literary zeitgeist, I don't know, it puts me off. Also, yeah, it's a massive thing, and I know it's framed as kind of a puzzle, a real metafiction, a real clever, thinky thoughter. I will get to it, and I've talked to other patrons who say it really is worth reading, it really is a great horror novel. I will get to it at some point because my curiosity is getting the better of me, and I really want to know what it is about House of Leaves that makes it such a genius work of fiction. I will get to it. I'm glad I finally addressed that. And if you'd like to recommend me books that I will read out at the end of videos like this, if you want to call me out for books I haven't read that I should read, well, you can support me on Patreon and help me keep the lights on. My patrons are everything to me. I spend all of my time in my Patreon Discord talking to my patrons instead of being on social media, talking to strangers. I have built a wonderful community on Patreon. I love my patrons. They fuel this channel entirely. Without them, it would die tomorrow. So if you want to be one of them, if you love my channel, if you've enjoyed this video, please support me on Patreon and you can recommend me books like this. Subscribe for books.